Hey everybody, Dr. Sean Talbot here. Hey, I want to talk to you for a few minutes today about kind of a heavy subject. We're going to talk about grief. And I want you to understand that grief is not just a brain thing. It's not just in your head. It's also a body thing. And this is really, really important. This idea of the body-mind connection to helping people work through grief is very, very important to get you to the other side. So let me pull up my slides real quick and we can get rolling on this. Okay, it shouldn't be a very long presentation, but I think an important one. So, understanding grief, it's not only in your head, it really is in your whole body. And what I want you to understand is this idea when we talk about, especially in the course, Certified Mental Wellness course, Certified Mental Wellness Coach course, we talk about the gut-brain axis and we talk about gut feelings. We talk about the heart-brain axis. We talk about, things like follow your heart and having a broken heart when it comes to grief. I want you to understand why you need to work through that, right? Why grief is something that you have to accept and go through step by step by step. I'm going to talk a little bit in this video about how to work through the grief, and we're going to talk about the top 10 biochemicals of grief, because as a nutritional biochemist, this is something I want you to understand what's actually happening in your body and your mind as you're going through this process. So why are we talking about this? Well, we're talking about it because I just lost my dog. 17 years old. You can see good old Morgan right here. We're having a discussion just a couple of days ago about her situation, and we know it wasn't going to be too much longer. So you can see a couple of quotes here. Dogs leave paw prints on our hearts. Dogs' lives are too short. Their only fault, really. But why should you listen to me? As besides, I'm somebody who is going through a period of grieving right now, and I'm going to explain to you how I'm going through it. I've been studying this kind of stuff for a long time, for the last 25 years or so, ever since my first of 14 books has come out on this idea of psychological nutrition, a PhD in nutritional biochemistry, MS in exercise science, studied entrepreneurship, et cetera, et cetera. You can see all of these different things. I am trained in nutritional biochemistry, but the kind of work that I do is sometimes called nutritional psychology. It's the idea of using food and using lifestyle in general, whether it's things that we're feeding our body in terms of nutrients or things that we're feeding our mind in terms of thought patterns and gratitude and the things that we tell ourselves, or how we're sleeping or how we're exposing ourselves to nature, or how we're moving our bodies. All that kind of stuff we cover in this course, the Certified Mental Wellness Coach course, and we teach these in the retreats that we run at Three Waves Wellness, which you can see at the bottom of the screen here. So I've been doing this for a long time. I try to practice as much of what I preach, and I try to educate as many people. So if you want to learn more about this is going to be a quick overview. If you want to learn more, hit my websites, doctalbot.com and threewaveswellness.com, and you can see what we're up to, because we really dive in deep to the idea that how we feel in our head is determined in large part by what goes on in our bodies. And a lot of that has to do with neurotransmitters. So I'm going to talk about my top 10 neurotransmitters and hormones and signaling molecules as they relate to the whole cycle of grief in this short seminar. But it's really important before we get to that to understand that even though we'll talk about neurotransmitters and hormones and signaling molecules in isolation, they never work in isolation. They work in concert with each other. So here you can see an example of dopamine, which sometimes we refer to as the motivation neurotransmitter, and norepinephrine, which sometimes we refer to as the concentration neurotransmitter, and serotonin, that we sometimes refer to as the happiness neurotransmitter. They work together with each other and in balance with each other and in feedback with each other to deliver what we experience as moods. So it's never just serotonin or just dopamine. There's always a balance between them. So that's a really important concept. But it's not just happening in your brain, it's also happening in your body. And so a lot of what we talk about is this idea, what you can see on the screen right now, is this idea of the gut-brain axis. So, for example, 90% of our body's serotonin is made in the gut, and it has signaling effects in the gut, but it also has signaling effects in the brain. So we know that if we can increase the production of gut serotonin, you will feel better in your brain. And there's lots of reasons for this. I actually do, hours and hours of the biochemistry of serotonin in our certified mental wellness coach course, and hours of the biochemistry of dopamine and the biochemistry of stress hormones like cortisol, et cetera, et cetera. So I won't go into all of that here. Suffice to say that what happens in your gut determines what happens in your brain. But there's a feedback mechanism. What happens in your brain also determines what happens in your gut. So we have signals that can be brain-derived signals that can go down to the gut, and we have signals that are gut-derived signals that can go up to the brain and to all the parts of the body that are in between those two brains. So, when we talk about grief, being stressed out about losing your 17-year-old dog, like I am in this situation right now, those stress signals are going to my gut and changing my gut physiology and changing my gut biochemistry and actually changing my gut ecology, what bacteria are growing there. Because I'm getting more stress signals from my brain down to my gut is not going to be in a very good place right now. Similarly, what's happening in my gut, if I'm stressed out and I just feel like eating junk food or comfort food, that's going to change what's happening in my gut, and then those signals are going to go up to my brain. So there's a lot of signaling that goes back and forth between our gut and our brain, and that's why we have these terms in our vocabulary around trusting your gut and having a gut feeling. And when something like this happens, you feel gutted. We have those words because they describe the experiences that we're going through. They describe our emotions. In a similar way, there are ways that those signals can get transferred through the body. So when we talk about the microbiome, the bacteria in your gut, and that being the source of 90% of your serotonin and 70% of your dopamine and 50% of your GABA, those signals have to get to your brain somehow, and vice versa. The signals from your brain have to get down to your gut somehow. That's what the axis is all about, what you can see in this box. The axis is the communication network whereby those signals go back and forth between these brains. So one that I've studied a lot in the research that we've done over the years is the immune system, so much so that we think of the immune system as a communication organ. So we know that people who are in long-term periods of grief, they've lost a loved one, and they can't get through the grieving process effectively, their immune system becomes suppressed. And when their immune system becomes suppressed, they get more susceptible to colds and flus and infections and COVID and even cancer cells, because your immune system is a vigilance organ against cancer. So it's not good to be in this situation, because those stress signals going across the gut-brain axis are going through the immune system and suppressing the immune system and leading to these physical health problems. So that's where the body and the mind are really intricately linked together, is through the immune system. But you can see these other communication pathways. The vagus nerve is a hardwired connection between the brain and the gut. The neuroendocrine system, this is your hormone system. So stress hormones, for example, will change, and those can affect other hormones like reproductive hormones, estrogens and testosterones and things like that. Some of these signals, especially cytokines that I'll talk about in just a minute, go through the circulatory system. So it's really important to think of what we're going through as a whole body situation. And we can intervene at the level of the microbiome, the bacteria. We can intervene at the level of the gut tissue itself. We can intervene at the brain, what our thought patterns look like. We can intervene at any of these signaling systems. We can intervene at the immune system and the vagus nerve, and et cetera, et cetera. So that might sound complicated, but actually, when you think about it, it gives us a whole bunch of different tools whereby we can manage this whole grief process and help ourselves get through it in a much more efficient way. Here's another way of looking at it. So we can intervene at the level of the microbiome, so we can feed our body the right nutrients so that we grow more of the good bacteria that make the neurotransmitters that we want, the serotonin serotonins for happiness and the dopamines for motivation, etc., we can grow fewer of the bacteria that give us bad signals, like inflammatory signals. I just finished reading a scientific paper the other day showing that balance in the microbiome can actually determine our overall stress response. It can determine our circadian rhythm. So, which is your 24-hour cycle of being awake and being asleep. That circadian rhythm can actually get amazingly disrupted when you're going through the process of grieving, where you can't get a good night's sleep, and then you're tired and fatigued and a little bit depressed during the day, and that leads to more insomnia, and that leads to more fatigue in the day, and you get into this vicious cycle. We can break that vicious cycle by intervening at the level of the microbiome. So this is part of the gut-brain axis. Another axis that I study a lot is the heart-brain axis. And this is the idea of your heart being a third brain. If the brain in your head is the first brain and the brain in your gut is the second brain, the brain in your heart, that concentration of 40,000 or so neurons, is legitimately a third brain. But the kind of information that it sends up to your first brain in your head is more electrical or electromagnetic in nature, and we can measure that. Some of you might be measuring it right now. I'm measuring it right now with this little band that measures heart rate variability. Some people do it with a ring. Some people do it with an Apple Watch. You can measure that electrical activity of your heart, and we know that improving the electrical activity of the heart can improve the electrical activity of the brain. So your heart rhythms can synchronize with your brain waves. And our group has actually done some studies we've published in peer-reviewed scientific journals that have shown that if you can improve what the heart is doing, you can improve what the brain is doing. So you get a physical performance benefit and a psychological, emotional performance benefit at the same time. So we'll talk about that a little bit. The other axis that I actually started my career in is the HPA axis, which stands for the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Your adrenal glands sit right on top of the kidneys. That's why you're seeing a picture of a kidney here. And your adrenal glands produce cortisol. Cortisol is one of those signaling molecules, your body's primary stress hormone, that can have effects in the heart, can have effects in the brain, can have effects in the gut. So in a lot of ways, cortisol is the central regulator stress hormone that can either help us through this process or impede our ability to move through this process. So cortisol is something that we're going to talk about a little bit in just a few minutes. So the HPA axis, you can think of this as your stress response system, your gut-brain axis, your heart-brain axis, and they're all working in concert with each other. And that's why we have to think of this overall system as a system. We can intervene at any one of these levels. We can intervene at the brain if we want to, but we have to realize that intervening just at the brain is ignoring the other aspects of the system. A more comprehensive, a more holistic approach would be to intervene at all of these systems simultaneously, and I'm going to explain to you a pretty simple way to do that. So here's the biochemistry of grief. I'm going to give you my top 10 biochemicals. Some of them are neurochemicals, some of them are hormones, some of them are other signaling molecules, but let's start off with the one that I think everyone is going to realize, which is serotonin. Serotonin, sometimes we refer to as the happiness neurotransmitter. If you don't have enough of it, that's the thing that's leading to depression. And like I said, I could talk for hours and hours about serotonin. We in the course, in the Certified Mental Health Coach course, we spend hours and hours talking about serotonin. We have, 4 or 5, probably 6 hours of serotonin metabolism discussed in that course. So, suffice to say, for our discussion right now, serotonin is a neurotransmitter of happiness. If you don't have enough of it, you're likely to be somewhat depressed. Dopamine is another one of these biochemicals, a neurotransmitter in this case, that is involved in the whole grief process. Dopamine we sometimes refer to as the neurotransmitter for motivation. 70% of your body's dopamine is made in your gut. And if you don't have enough of it produced in your gut, in your brain, across your whole gut-heart-brain axis, you might have something that's referred to as anhedonia, which is lack of motivation. You're not motivated to do anything. You're not motivated to hang out with other people. You're not motivated to do things that used to give you pleasure. So you might lose interest in hobbies. You might lose interest in anything that used to give you pleasure. You lose interest in that. So anhedonia is a little bit different than depression. Depression is more oriented towards serotonin deficiency. Anhedonia is more oriented towards dopamine deficiency. But obviously, they play off of each other as we're going through a grieving process. GABA is involved. GABA is the body's primary relaxing neurotransmitter. So if you can't produce enough GABA when you're stressed, you can't have that relaxation effect. And about 50% of our body's GABA is produced in the gut. There are specific bacteria in the gut, different lactobacillus species, that are GABA producers. And if we don't have the right levels of those, or the right metabolism of those specific species of bacteria, we can't produce enough GABA, and we can't relax in the face of stress. And so our experience is that we're irritable. We're just irritated about everything that comes down the pike. So we need more GABA during this process. Oxytocin is one that maybe you've heard of before. This is a hormone, and sometimes it's called the connection hormone. Sometimes it's called the cuddle hormone. This is the hormone that is made in the body of a mom and a child, especially during the process of delivering the baby. Mom and baby will make lots of oxytocin, and that oxytocin it causes them to connect with each other at a really, really deep level. There's lots of things that can help us with oxytocin levels. Looking people in the eye, a little bit of a touch. I'll have some examples on the next page. But if we don't have enough oxytocin, we are disconnected. We might even be so disconnected that we don't even feel like connecting with other people, and that can lead to loneliness. And we certainly have a loneliness epidemic that isn't going to help anybody go through the grieving process. Number 5 is cortisol, body's primary stress hormone. So if we're producing too much cortisol, as we might expect that we would during a grieving process, that is going to make us feel stressed. It's also going to change our appetite. It's also going to change our metabolism in terms of our blood sugar control. It's going to lead us to stress eating. And if we have enough cortisol, sort of like the Goldilocks amount, right? Not too much, not too little, that allows us to be resilient. So cortisol is something we want some of at the right times. Usually we want more of it during the day and less of it at night. There's a circadian rhythm to cortisol. And so if we can get the right levels of cortisol at the right time, we will be resilient in the face of stress versus stressed in the face of a stressful situation. And we'll talk about that a little bit. The thing about cortisol, and the reason that I have it right here at number 5, is that it can interfere with all of these other neurotransmitters that I just listed. So if your cortisol is too high, if you're chronically exposed to cortisol, as you might expect you would be in a long-term grieving process, right? When you're having trouble getting through the process, you're being overexposed to these medium levels of cortisol day in and day out. That will block your body's ability to use serotonin. So even if you have enough serotonin, it can't get by the cortisol blockade. So you're feeling stressed and sad. If it's dopamine, you're feeling stressed and unmotivated. If it's GABA, you're feeling stressed and irritable. So cortisol is bad on its own when we're overexposed to it, but it's doubly bad or triply bad or quadruply bad because it can block the beneficial effects of those other neurotransmitters. So cortisol is particularly toxic if we can't get through that stress response. Now, cytokines is sort of a twofer. I'm going to give you a 6 and 7 for cytokines because in our bodies, cytokines are just a word that we use for. Cytokines are signaling molecules that cells use to communicate with each other, and they can be inflammatory or anti-inflammatory. So there's a whole family of inflammatory cytokines. We don't want those. We want only a little bit of those. We want those when our immune system is attacking something. We want a little bit of those when our body is repairing damage or recuperating from an injury. But we don't want too many of those. We want, again, the Goldilocks approach, a little bit, and then they go away. We want them to be replaced by the anti-inflammatory cytokines. If we have too many of the inflammatory kind, we're going to feel stiff and achy. If we have not enough of the anti-inflammatory kind, we're going to feel stiff and achy. If we have the right amount of the anti-inflammatory kind, we're going to feel flexible. We're going to feel like we can bounce back from an injury. We're going to feel like we can recover fully from our exercise routines, and we're not quite as sore, and not quite as stiff, and not quite as, feeling old. So cytokines are that balance where we want the right amount of anti-inflammatory and the right amount of inflammatory so that our bodies can do their healing process and repair process. Endorphins. Now, you might recognize endorphins as these compounds that are made while we're exercising. And so sometimes people think that endorphins are involved in the runner's high, that sort of, glow of well-being that you get after you exercise. And they are, but they're involved in sort of a different way than most people realize. So endorphins, what they do is they block pain. So when we're exercising, our body makes endorphins so that exercise isn't as painful. And the thing about endorphins is that they're very large molecules, so they will be produced by our muscles, but they can't get into the brain. So they're not really having a brain pleasure effect. They're having a body pleasure effect. So endorphins are really good at reducing pain and engendering a feel good effect in the body, what we call the periphery, outside of the central nervous system. The ones that can get into the brain are called endocannabinoids. And so endocannabinoids that our body naturally makes especially when we're exercising, are also natural pain relievers, but they do get across the blood-brain barrier. And so these can increase pleasure and reduce pain in the brain. So you've got the body benefits of endorphins, and you've got the brain benefits of endocannabinoids. And then the last one is myokines. Myokines are a particular type of cytokine. They're signaling molecules, but so cyto means cell. Myo means muscle. So these are cytokines that come specifically from the muscle when we're contracting. And when are we contracting? When we're physically active. So whether we're walking the dog and not doing as much of that now with the passing of my 17-year-old Morgan, but anytime you contract your muscles, you can be gardening, you can be running, you can be lifting weights, you can be going on a hike, you can be whatever. Whenever you're contracting your muscles are making these myokines, and we know that these are related to the whole runner's high kind of an idea, that you feel better after you're physically active. We know that they reduce anxiety and depression, but so that's the idea of turning down a negative signal, right? You're turning down an anxiety signal, turning down a depression signal. But uniquely, they seem to foster optimism. And that's one of the reasons that myokines are sometimes referred to as hope molecules, because they can make us more hopeful for the future. So if you look across all of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, there's one intervention that will help normalize all of these as we go through a grieving process. And it's exercise. It is moving your body. It is getting outside. It is doing something inside. It is doing something with a friend so that you get an increase in your oxytocin at the same time. It's joining a yoga class. It's going to do a spin. It's going to, walk the new puppy, if that's something that is going to fall into your lifestyle. All kinds of ways that we can also do. So exercise is the number one by far way to do this. And this is why I refer to the grief process as something that you need to work through. If you can actually work out through your grief process, it helps all of that biochemistry go in the right direction. Now, just going out and exercising isn't going to remove your loss. It's not going to, bring back your loved one, but it is going to help put all of that disrupted biochemistry back on the shelf, so to speak, in the right Goldilocks level, so you have the right levels when you need them, and your body is going to recover a lot faster. So physical activity is a great way to do it. Here are some other ways that we can do it: dopamine, oxytocin, endorphins, serotonin. As I mentioned before, we'll do, hours and hours in the certified mental wellness coach course on each of these different neurotransmitters. And the reason that we do that is that we want our certified mental wellness coaches to have a good understanding of the biochemistry so that they have a solid foundation to help their clients, whether their clients are, just trying to feel better, whether they're trying to perform at their highest level, whether they're trying to get a handle on their stress levels, if they're trying to get a handle on better sleep quality. It's all about helping people feel better. And obviously grief is one of those places that we can help people through. But it's not just about exercise. It's not just about eating right. It's not just about your mindset. There are so many ways that we can help people move down those pathways of mental wellness. Here are a few examples. This is a chart from the Global Wellness Institute, an organization that I'm an ambassador of. If you want more information about this obviously was a really, really high level look at the biochemistry of grief. I hope that you're interested to dig into any of those. If you want to dig in more on the endocannabinoids, you want to dig in more on the serotonin or the dopamine or the cortisol or any of that other stuff, please feel free to hit these websites. DocTalbot.com. You can see a lot of the free videos that we put up there. You can see a lot of the certification programs that we put up there. Three Waves Wellness, you can actually come and visit us, and you spend a couple of days with us, and we'll teach you through all of this, and you'll actually get to live a lot of these principles and experience them, experience them yourselves. And I'm going to leave you with this: whenever you're grieving, whenever you need just a little smile on your face, I encourage you to look up Bucket of Sloths on your search engine of choice, and you're going to get videos of sloths. You're going to get, this is a screen grab from a video that I send out a lot, where a sloth rescue organization is bathing the baby sloths, and so they wash them and they rinse them and they dry them off, and then they air dry them by hanging the baby sloths on a clothesline. And it's not going to solve your grief, but it might give you a little smile, and that can certainly help everybody through this. So I appreciate you guys jumping in here, learning about the biochemistry of grief, and I hope you check out some of the other resources that we have. Take care.